The grill hissed as flames licked at the thick-cut steaks, their juices sizzling on the hot grates. Smoke curled into the air, carrying the rich aroma of mesquite and slow-cooked ribs. The sun hung low, casting golden light over the neatly trimmed lawns of the suburban neighborhood. Laughter rang out from the patio as friends clinked their drinks together, their voices blending into the sound of distant summer cicadas. The evening was perfect. Jake flipped a burger with practiced ease, his mouth watering as he caught the scent of charred seasoning. His backyard was alive with conversation, a warm, buzzing energy that made the week's stress melt away. He had worked hard for this place, a home where he could finally enjoy life on his own terms. But just as he reached for a cold beer from the cooler, a shrill voice sliced through the pleasant hum of the gathering. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" The laughter faltered. A few guests turned toward the voice, their smiles stiffening. Jake sighed before even looking. He knew that tone, that voice. It was unmistakable. Standing at the edge of his yard, arms folded so tightly they might snap, was Karen, president of the Homeowners Association and self-proclaimed enforcer of all things proper in the neighborhood. Her angular face was pinched with disapproval, her short, meticulously styled blonde hair barely shifting as she stomped across the grass. Jake forced a smile, though he already knew how this would go. "Hey Karen. Nice evening, isn't it?" Her expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened. "Nice? Hardly. What is that stench?" She fanned the air dramatically as if choking on toxic fumes. "It smells like death." Jake bit back a laugh. "That would be the barbecue. You know, cooking food. Grilling. Pretty standard for a summer night." Karen's nostrils flared. "Standard? Standard for whom exactly? Barbaric meat-eaters? Have you no regard for the neighborhood's air quality? The environment? The innocent lives lost for your gluttony?" A few of Jake's friends exchanged glances, barely suppressing their amusement. One of them, Tom, muttered under his breath, "Oh boy, here we go." Jake took a slow sip of his beer before responding. "Karen, it's my backyard. I'm within my rights to have a barbecue. I'm not blasting music. I'm not littering. I'm just cooking for my friends and family." Karen scoffed. "Your so-called rights don't override the well-being of others. I can smell this from my porch. The entire neighborhood is being subjected to the stench of burning flesh." She turned sharply, addressing the other guests. "And you all condone this? Do you enjoy eating suffering?" A tense silence settled. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to engage. Others rolled their eyes, clearly accustomed to Karen's flair for the dramatic. Jake sighed. "Look, I get that you have your beliefs and I respect that. But I eat meat. So do a lot of people. You don't get to police what I cook in my own yard." Karen's eyes gleamed as if she had been waiting for that. "Oh, but I do," she said, pulling a folded paper from her handbag. She unfolded it with a flourish, holding it up like a legal decree. Section 14B of the HOA regulations clearly states that any outdoor activity causing excessive smoke or odor that disrupts community enjoyment is a violation. Jake took the paper, scanning the text. He had read the HOA rules before, but this clause was vague at best. This is about nuisance-level smoke, like bonfires or industrial burning. A barbecue doesn't count. Karen smirked. "That's your interpretation. But as the HOA president, my interpretation is the one that matters." Jake clenched his jaw. This was ridiculous. He knew Karen had a vendetta against him. Ever since he moved in, she had found reasons to nitpick everything from the color of his porch light to the way he parked his truck. But this was next-level petty. "I'm not shutting down my barbecue, Karen." She gasped, hand on her chest as if he had just confessed to a heinous crime. "You refuse to comply?" "I refuse to be bullied in my own home." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine," she said, voice cool and dripping with condescension. "You've made your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back toward the street, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. As soon as she was out of earshot, Tom let out a low whistle. "Damn. She's really got it out for you, huh?" Jake exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah. And something tells me this isn't over." His gaze lingered on the paper in his hands, a sense of unease creeping in despite the warmth of the fire. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was relentless. And if he knew anything about her, it was that she never backed down without a fight. The morning after the barbecue, Jake stepped outside to grab the mail, still half asleep and nursing a cup of coffee. The neighborhood was quiet, the air fresh with the scent of damp grass. But as he flipped through the envelopes, his stomach tightened. There it was, An official HOA violation notice, printed in bold, unforgiving letters. He ripped it open and skimmed the contents. Fine, $250 for air pollution and disrupting community harmony. Jake let out a sharp laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. Karen hadn't wasted a second. He could practically see her smug expression as she filed the complaint, probably grinning to herself like she'd already won. Unbelievable, he muttered. As if on cue, Karen appeared at the edge of her driveway, dressed in her usual immaculately pressed slacks and cardigan, her arms folded in satisfaction. "Oh dear," she called over in mock sympathy. "Looks like someone's learning that rules do apply to them." Jake took a slow sip of his coffee, forcing himself to stay calm. "You really went through all that trouble just to find me for grilling?" Karen's smile didn't falter. "Oh, it was no trouble at all. The HOA takes violations very seriously. As president, it's my duty to maintain the integrity of this community." She gestured vaguely toward the row of identical, perfectly manicured houses, as if she were personally responsible for their existence. "And I must say, Jake, your behavior last night was deeply disappointing." He clenched his jaw. "You do realize this is harassment, right?" She feigned a gasp. "Harassment? Me? No. This is simply enforcement." Jake knew better than to argue with her, she thrived on it. Instead, he turned away, shaking his head, but she wasn't finished. "I hope you read that notice carefully," she added sweetly. "Multiple offenses can lead to steeper fines. Even potential legal action." It was a threat. A thinly veiled one, but a threat nonetheless. Jake gritted his teeth, saying nothing as he walked back inside. She wanted him to react, to get angry. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But over the next few days, Karen made sure he wouldn't forget she was watching. First came the noise complaints. Jake's doorbell rang late in the evening, and he opened it to find a police officer standing on his porch. "Sir, we got a report of a disturbance at this address," the officer said, glancing inside where Jake had been sitting alone, watching TV with the volume on low. "Are you serious?" Jake scoffed. "I haven't even had anyone over." The officer sighed. "Look, we have to respond when a complaint's made. But from what I can see, there's nothing wrong. Just be aware that someone's keeping tabs." Jake didn't have to guess who. Then came the online attacks. One afternoon, he checked his phone and found his name plastered all over the neighborhood Facebook group. Karen had posted a lengthy rant about certain residents who were poisoning the air with their barbaric habits and threatening the peaceful, cruelty-free values of the community. The comment section was split. Some agreed with her, but many were mocking the absurdity of it. One person even joked, "Next she's gonna fine people for eating eggs." Still, the damage was done. Jake was being painted as some villainous meat-loving tyrant. The final straw came when he caught her in the act. He had just pulled into his driveway when he noticed movement near his fence. At first, he thought it was a dog or maybe a delivery person cutting across his yard. But then he saw her. Karen, standing just outside his property line, holding her phone up like a detective gathering evidence at a crime scene. Jake's blood boiled. Enough was enough. He stepped out of his truck, slamming the door behind him. "Karen." She flinched, clearly not expecting to be caught. But in true Karen fashion, she recovered quickly, putting on her usual air of self-importance. "Oh, Jake. Just ensuring everything remains compliant." "With what, exactly?" he demanded. She narrowed her eyes. "Well, I wouldn't be surprised if I found more violations. Perhaps improper waste disposal? Or..." Jake took a step forward. "You're stalking me now? Do you even hear yourself?" Karen smirked. "Oh dear. Such hostility. Maybe that's a sign of a guilty conscience." Jake exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Karen, this obsession of yours? It's not gonna work. You can file your complaints, your fines, whatever. But you don't get to intimidate me." Her expression darkened for a split second before she smiled again, saccharine and smug. "Oh, Jake," she said softly. "I don't need to intimidate you. I just need to wait. Eventually you'll break." And with that, she turned on her heel and strolled away. Jake stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched. This wasn't just about a barbecue anymore. This was war. And Karen thought she had already won. She had no idea what was coming. Jake sat at his kitchen table, fingers drumming against the wooden surface, his jaw tight as he stared at the stack of violation notices Karen had managed to pile up in less than a week. His blood boiled as he flipped through them, each more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized gathering. Air contamination. Failure to comply with community dietary values. That one made him laugh out loud. It was absurd. It was harassment. And it was time to fight back. She wanted to play dirty? Fine. He could get his hands a little dirty too. Pulling out his laptop, Jake dove into the HOA bylaws, scanning for anything Karen might have overlooked. If she was going to weaponize the rulebook against him, he'd find a way to turn it against her. He knew there had to be something. Some regulation, some loophole that could expose just how selectively she enforced her power. And then, buried deep in an obscure section, he found it. Karen's house, the picture-perfect temple of self-righteousness, was in violation of 3 separate HOA codes. Her front garden, filled with self-proclaimed eco-friendly, cruelty-free plants, was technically over the height limit for non-native species. Her driveway, newly sealed and glossy, had been redone without the required HOA approval. And the kicker? She had been using HOA funds for community projects that, as far as anyone could tell, didn't exist. Jake grinned. The queen of compliance was living in a glass house. And he had a handful of rocks. The next morning he filed 3 official complaints against her, using the exact bureaucratic jargon she loved to throw at everyone else. Then, just for fun, he sent an anonymous tip to the HOA Financial Oversight Committee. By noon, the neighborhood group chat was already buzzing. At first, Karen dismissed it. Petty retaliation, she called it, waving off the allegations with her usual arrogance. But then the HOA board got involved. And suddenly Karen wasn't so smug. Jake watched from his porch as 2 members of the HOA board arrived at her house, clipboards in hand. Karen greeted them with a forced smile, her voice sickly sweet, but as they began inspecting her garden, her expression darkened. He saw her pointing, arguing, even attempting that condescending little laugh she used whenever she thought she was above something. But the board members weren't laughing. By the time they moved to her driveway, Karen was fuming. She knew she was caught. And the best part? Jake wasn't even done yet. That evening he hosted another barbecue. Not just any barbecue, a block party. He sent out invitations to the entire neighborhood, even the ones who had sided with Karen. Most people weren't actually against him. They just didn't want to be the next target of her wrath. But now that she was under fire, their fear had started to crack. People were tired of walking on eggshells in their own community. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the party came alive. Music played, drinks flowed, and the rich aroma of sizzling burgers and smoked ribs filled the air. Laughter echoed down the street as kids played, neighbors mingled, and for the first time in a long time, people relaxed. Then, like clockwork, Karen appeared. She stormed across the street, eyes wild, clutching her phone in one hand. Her hair was slightly disheveled, a rare sight for someone who always prided herself on her polished image. "This," she hissed, waving a shaking hand at the gathering, "is a direct violation of community guidelines." Jake smiled, casually flipping a steak. "Oh yeah? Which one?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time she hesitated. You can't just, this is public disturbance," she sputtered. "Not according to HOA guidelines," Jake said smoothly. "See, I checked. As long as the noise level stays within reasonable limits and there's no littering, we're good. And don't worry, I made sure to get official approval for this community event." He tapped a printed HOA approval slip pinned to his cooler. "Signed off this morning." Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. "You manipulated the system." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you have a problem with that?" A few guests chuckled. Karen whipped around, looking for support, but instead she found neighbors avoiding her gaze. Some even smirked, enjoying the show. "Face it, Karen," Jake said, lowering the grill lid with a satisfying click. "People are sick of your nonsense." For the first time, real panic flickered across her face. She knew she was losing control. And Karen didn't handle losing well. She clenched her jaw, seething. "This isn't over." Jake met her glare with an easy smile. "Oh, I'm counting on it." Karen's rage simmered beneath the surface as she stormed away from the block party, her hands clenched into tight fists. She had spent years crafting her authority in this neighborhood, dictating every aspect of community life under the guise of order and preservation. And now, because of him, it was all crumbling. The HOA was breathing down her neck, her neighbors were turning against her, and worst of all, she had lost control. That was unacceptable. Jake watched her retreat with a quiet satisfaction, but he knew better than to think she'd give up. Karen didn't lose, at least not without a fight. She would regroup, scheme, and come back sharper, more dangerous. And he was right. The very next morning, a new notice appeared on his door. This one was different. *** final warning. HOA legal action pending ***. Jake's stomach twisted as he read the words. He had expected retaliation, but legal action? That was a whole new level of escalation. The fine had jumped to $2,000, and according to the letter, continued infractions could result in a forced sale of his home. She wasn't just trying to make his life miserable. She was trying to destroy him. He exhaled slowly, keeping his temper in check. This wasn't just about him anymore. If she could do this to him, she could do it to anyone. Karen had ruled the HOA like a dictator for too long. She needed to be stopped, not just put in her place but removed entirely. And he had a plan. That evening, as the neighborhood wound down for the night, Jake set his trap. He positioned security cameras around his yard, strategically placed, barely noticeable. Then he baited Karen with the one thing she couldn't resist, an opportunity to catch him in a violation. He left his backyard lights on, a few chairs scattered around, the faint sound of music playing softly from a speaker, just enough to make it seem like another unauthorized gathering. Then he waited. It didn't take long. At exactly 11:47 p.m., his motion sensor pinged. Karen, dressed in dark clothes, phone in hand, trespassing. Jake watched in real time as she crept onto his property, her phone camera flicking on. She snapped photos of his yard, zoomed in on his grill, even tiptoed toward his back door like she was gathering evidence for a case only she cared about. But the moment she crossed onto his porch, bam, a spotlight flooded the yard, illuminating her like a thief caught in the act. Karen froze. Jake stepped out from the shadows, arms folded, his phone already recording. You know, Karen, trespassing is a serious offense. Her head snapped up, her face twisted in panic. I was just. You were just breaking and entering? Jake said, tilting his phone so she could see the screen. Because that's what it looks like. Karen's mouth opened and closed, scrambling for an excuse, but Jake wasn't done. Oh, and by the way, he added, his voice laced with amusement, did you know that misuse of HOA funds is considered fraud? The color drained from her face. Jake stepped closer, his voice calm but edged with steel. I filed a formal request for the HOA's financial records. Turns out, those community projects you funded? They don't exist. He smiled. But the withdrawals? Oh, those are very, very real. Karen's entire body went rigid. Jake let the silence stretch between them, let the weight of her impending downfall sink in. Here's what's going to happen, he finally said, his tone casual. You're going to resign from the HOA. Effective immediately. No more fines, no more threats, no more of your petty little games. Karen's lips trembled, her hands balled into fists at her sides. You can't. Oh, I can, Jake interrupted. And if you don't? Well, he lifted his phone slightly. This video? It goes everywhere, the HOA, the police, the entire neighborhood, he smiled. I bet they'd love to see their fearless leader sneaking around like a criminal. Karen shook with silent rage, her whole body coiled like a spring. For a moment, it looked like she might lash out, throw one last desperate insult his way, but she didn't. Because she knew. She had lost. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heel and marched away. The next morning, the entire neighborhood received an official email. Effective immediately, Karen, redacted, has voluntarily stepped down from her role as HOA president. We appreciate her years of service, Jake leaned back in his chair, reading it over with a satisfied grin. For the first time in years, the neighborhood could breathe easy.